Hello everyone, and welcome to my reference interview analysis presentation. So let's start with the question that I asked. I asked a question about genetics. Specifically, are there certain traits, characteristics, disorders, medical conditions, etc. a person is more likely to inherit from their mother's side of the family versus their father's side? The question is simple enough to understand, so there isn't a lot of time lost on explanation or clarification for what I want. I left the question intentionally vague enough to give the librarians some wiggle room. I didn't want to tie them down by asking for really minute details like hair or eye color or a specific disorder. This is exactly the sort of open-ended question public library patrons frequently ask. It starts off as a really understandable question, and then as you start to scrape the surface you realize, oh, there's way more to this question than you think at first glance. And the idea of including so many additional potential quantifiers, whether it's a genetic trait or a medical condition, forces the librarian to cast a wider net and search for more varied materials. And now for my resources. For my face-to-face interview, I went to Lake Forest Library. For my online chat, I used the Ask a Librarian function from the Vernon Area Public Library website. So let's start with the face-to-face reference interview. While I was at Lake Forest, I spoke with a reference librarian named Kate. Kate told me the library wouldn't have much in the way of books on genetics, and that if I really wanted a physical resource, I would have better luck finding it at Lake Forest College Library. Despite this, Kate continued searching for me, and she was able to find a couple medical and science books in the library's collection. In addition, she walked me over to the bank of computers for public use, signed me into one, and directed me to the library's online resources. Kind of like the list of databases that we have at the Rebecca Crown Library page. And among these databases, she highly recommended Medline Plus as a way to search for answers. Now, within minutes of searching on Medline, I was able to find multiple articles detailing exactly what I wanted, taken from the National Institute of Health and U.S. National Library of Medicine websites. One of the articles, What Are Different Ways in Which a Genetic Condition Can Be Inherited, detailed how different medical conditions can be inherited whether the gene it comes from is dominant or recessive. Like how Huntington disease and Marfan syndrome are both autosomal dominant, while cystic fibrosis and sickle cell are autosomal recessive. And that the chances of passing a trait or disorder to a child depends on which chromosome it's attached to. And in a second article, if a genetic disorder runs in my family, what are the chances that my children will have the condition, gave details saying someone with an autosomal dominant disorder has a 50% chance of passing the mutated gene onto a child. Meanwhile, two unaffected parents, that is to say, two people who both have the defect but don't experience it, have a 25% chance of passing it on to a child. And these were just preliminary details. I didn't go into too far in the articles reading them. I didn't want to dive in really far, but this is just stuff I was able to get by skimming through the articles. So let's move on to the online reference interview. The representative I chatted with online from Vernon Area Public Library was very friendly, and they responded promptly whenever I asked questions or provided further info. While they were searching, they would type back every now and again to let me know what they were doing and how applicable they thought a certain source might be. Now, the resources that this representative gave me were pretty varied. Similar to Lake Forest, Vernon Hills wouldn't have much in the way of books on scientific research into genetics and things like this, so all the results that I got were electronic. And funnily enough, the librarian at first guided me to the same database and articles that the Lake Forest librarian had gone to. But then when I pressed for additional resources, they started me off with a WebMD article that breaks down the subject of genes and inheritance-based contributions. And my takeaway from this article was that the tone was very approachable and served as a good starting point for the uninitiated. It wasn't patronizing or pandering in any way. It was just a nice, simple article that someone with limited or no familiarity with genetics could read. And then, in addition to all this, they provided a Quora article and a blog post on Discover Magazine's website. Quora went on to say that Female children get 50% of their nuclear DNA from their mother and 50% from their fathers, while male children get just a little bit more of their nuclear DNA from their mothers due to the X chromosome from the mothers containing more genetic material than the Y chromosomes they get from their fathers. Now, to kind of contradict this, the Discover magazine article that I skimmed detailed a study that had been done to look at the genetics of mice. They interbred several clans of mice and then examined the genetics and found that 60% more of the mice showed active genes from the fathers than the mothers. So let's pit these two against each other in an evaluation, starting with the face-to-face interaction. Even with the knowledge that the library wouldn't have much in the way of books on genetics, Kate still searched, and she was able to find me a couple books on genetics that had come out this year, meaning their information would have been very up to date. She did emphasize that if I really wanted books, she would recommend the library at Lake Forest College as an alternate starting point. But then she also took the time to log me into a computer, show me the online resources for the library, and point out a couple databases that she thought would be especially helpful. Moving to the online interaction, again, this person was very prompt. The longest wait time that I had between replies was 5 minutes. But on the flip side of that, this chat is run by someone who's working the reference desk, meaning they're on the floor and helping patrons. So this chat is one of a million things that they do every day. And depending how busy they are on any given day, I may or may not get the same prompt replies that I did this time around. Now, depending on the kind of person who's asking the question, the representative did give some very nice introductory materials to study, like the WebMD article, because someone who's researching this may not want to dive straight into a really complicated book on the subject. So having this little bridge was a nice transition to get into the subject. However, the representative did admit to me that they had used Google to do some of the searches, and that's something that we as librarians really strive to move away from. So what's the result? While I considered both of these interviews to be successful, I found that I personally preferred the face-to-face interaction over the online chat. Because going back to some of the concerns we have about the online chat, if the department is really busy, they may not get to you right away. As opposed to actually being at the desk with the librarian right in front of you, they're going to work as quickly as they can to try and get you some answers. And there was also the concern that the librarian used Google to find some of the resources, which honestly I could have done at home on my own. When it comes to future reference questions I'm going to ask if I can't find the answers on my own, I see myself going back to speak to the librarians face-to-face. And it's not that I have anything against the online chats, but I prefer how hands-on an interaction with a librarian can be, much like how Kate took me over to the computer and showed me the sources that she thought would be the best. And let's say that I'm having problems with the computer or the database, she's also right there at the desk to help me with any additional difficulties. Now, if I was going to use the online chat again, it would probably be if I had a much simpler reference question, one that wasn't as detailed as the genetics question that I asked for this project. If my question was going to be a much easier search, or if it was for a paper that didn't require as many resources, that is when I would feel more comfortable asking the chat.